Jen Rowe, who's just speaking, who is our active transportation planner with the Boston Transportation Department. All right, jumping into the meeting goals for today, we want to learn how the city is thinking about the future of street trees. We want to provide updates about the Boston Urban Forest Plan, the role of street trees in the urban forest, how the city plants, supports, and protects the streets throughout the city, and how you, I mean, the residents, can help care for street trees in your neighborhood. We also want you to learn about the Cummins Highway Reconstruction project. We'll highlight some project goals and opportunities, what we've learned about the existing trees on Cummins Highway, how we intend to protect the existing trees on Cummins Highway, and also design for new trees. And of course, we'll provide the next steps for this project. All right, to jump in, to give you guys just a quick update on the Cummins Highway reconstruction project. The trial ended in October of 2021. Until construction begins, the street will be maintained as it currently was before the pilot. During the last year, we collected traffic data where we looked at speeds, travel times, and also solicited information about your experience of the one lane in each direction. If you want more information on the pilot and the temporary redesign, please visit boston.gov/Cummins-Highway to review the data that we collected. The data that we collected will inform how we design the new Cummins Highway, but also your input is still very crucial of how we move forward. As I mentioned, your input is very crucial to our design process. We cannot produce a design without your input. Ultimately, what you decide, will shape how Cummins Highway will be for the next 70 years. Currently, we are doing community outreach to inform on the final design, which we have actually begun in regards to the 25% design. So why do we plan to reconstruct Cummins Highway? I'm sure if you're involved participant in this project, you know that Cummins Highway hasn't been updated since the spring of 1955. When streetcars ran along Cummins Highway, and they were removed in 1953 to make room for more cars. Ultimately, what you're seeing right now, the street layout reflects the priorities of the 1950s, which essentially enabled non-residents to quickly drive through the Mattapan neighborhood. So as part of this project, it's reconstruction of Cummins Highway, we plan on completely rebuilding the street. That includes sidewalks, curbs. We plan on removing the lights out of the median and installing new lights, new traffic signals, and also repaving the roadway and updating any utilities as necessary. As you guys know, National Grid is still out there. Maybe not out there right now in regards to the winter, but they've been out there relaying their gas main, which has had a number of issues in the past. The city has budgeted approximately $12 million for reconstruction of Cummins Highway. To provide an update of that, it's now $24 million. So it's definitely a large investment that we're bringing to the Mattapan neighborhood as part of this project. So as part of this project, we're definitely looking at advancing the goals of Go Boston 2030, which looks at improving safety on our streets, reducing emissions, and ultimately investing in communities to achieve equity and in access to opportunities. Next slide, please. So another way of advancing our goals and our collective plans is we want to inform residents of the work that's happening around the city. As you guys know, there's a number of projects that are happening in the Mattapan community, whether it be the Blue Hill Ave, the Mattapan Square improvements. Plan Mattapan from the BPDA has been involved in reaching out to this community. We're ultimately working to improve collaboration in our work and ultimately achieve the neighborhood and citywide goals. And of course, as I mentioned, Of course, as I mentioned, it's about collaborating with residents to advance your goals. We want to create and provide awareness and participation in efforts and things that you care about. And of course, I mean, we want to confirm your vision for the future projects that we have coming out in this neighborhood, as well as what you want for your neighborhood. With that, I will kick it over to my colleague, Maggie, to talk about the urban forest plan.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I work for the Parks Department and project manager for the Urban Forest Plan. Though I just want to note that the Urban Forest Plan is led by the Parks Department, but it is a citywide project. Everyone's involved, and that's why I'm here tonight. So before I dive into the Urban Forest Plan, I want to call attention to 3 planning projects that are happening at the same time. They overlap in health and climate resilience. And that's the heat resilience study, the urban forest plan, and the open space and recreation plan. We call this Healthy Places Planning for Heat, Trees, and Open Space. It's really a coordinated effort among these 3 plans to make sure that they learn from one another and put forward recommendations that really align. And I can share a link because I forgot to share it beforehand, but if you visit the Healthy Places website, it's a one-stop shop. You can learn about all 3 projects and sign up for a newsletter that goes out occasionally, and you'll get updates on each project. Next slide. So, the urban forest plan. What is an urban forest? This project considers the urban forest to be all the trees within Boston. That includes trees that grow on both private and public property. And this is Boston's first ever plan. It's our first ever attempt to pull together all the information and understand what is happening with the urban forest. Where do we want to be, and how do we get there? How do we expand the forest? And this project is important because trees are important to everyone for a variety of reasons. And it's important for environmental justice issues, climate resiliency, and we're facing increasing development pressure. And there are all sorts of projects happening in the city at any one time, including projects like Cummins Highway. And the urban forest plan will provide information and recommendations that will guide how trees are a part of that work. Now, to put forward a plan that about managing the forest, one that works, we're looking at all the trees once more. We'll also have to take a look at all the caretakers of our trees. There are so many community members, agencies, organizations, and institutions involved with keeping trees alive. And that's why this project looks at so many different aspects like funding, policy, staffing, design, existing community work, and workforce development. Workforce development meaning how to bring more people into tree care jobs. Essentially, if you're probably wondering about trees, something about trees, we're probably talking about it. Next slide. Now, one thing that's important to the project is that, once more, trees grow in all sorts of different situations. And this isn't a comprehensive list of trees, of places where trees grow, as you know, but streets, parks, yards, campuses, they all are cared for in different ways. They are subject to different policies and regulations. They have different growing conditions. And these are all things that we're trying to consider as we create this plan. And one other thing that's important, you might have trees that grow in single row lines like streets. You might have trees that grow in clusters like in a lot of our parks, or you might have large forested tracts. The urban forest plan is looking at all this, but each kind of setting will require different considerations. And today we'll be mostly talking about street trees. Thank you. Now, when this project started, the first thing we did was establish a community advisory board of about 60 plus members and from across the city. And we started with 3 workshops and have continued to gather their perspectives, priorities, and feedback. And they've been assisting in spreading word about the project and helping guide our outreach. If you'd like to learn more about who is on the board, how it works, and read meeting notes, Those can all be found on the Urban Forest Plan project page. Next. I do want to note that we've been gathering a lot of background information. We've been doing interviews, community meetings, and after all of that, we're finally ready to present draft goals and recommendations. So I welcome you to join on March 14th at 5:30 p.m., where we'll have an open house and plenty of time for question and answer. But if you know of a community meeting that is happening in the next few months and people would like to learn about the project, I would be happy to attend, and you can call or email me anytime, not only about that community meeting, but also if you have any questions. I'd also recommend that you check out the project page because it has a lot of data, news, and general project information that could be helpful, including a frequently asked questions section, covering things from what is the urban forest to, are you considering different kinds of tree species? Next. So how are street trees a part of the urban forest, and how are they considered in the urban forest plan? Now, maybe some of this goes without saying, but trees are great in a lot of ways, and they come with a lot of benefits, not only because they can cool the city, and a cooler city tends to have better air quality, but it also means a lot to us in ways that we can't quantify, a lot of cultural value, and it really differs from person to person, and that is super important to us in this project. And trees capture water, and they are one component of reducing flooding. They provide wildlife habitat. And I do want to acknowledge that trees do have a complicated relationship with air quality in the city, and it is not as simple as saying trees are wonderful for air quality. We know that some folks struggle with asthma and pollen. At the same time, asthma rates increase with worsening air quality from pollution and worsening heat. So it's kind of a give and take, and the science is really still being advanced as to how do trees affect air quality in cities. So I do want to acknowledge that kind of gray area. Now, I may mention a few words that you could be less familiar with, and so I want to go over that before I get any further. Canopy. Canopy is, if you look at top down at a tree, the canopy is all that green, is the green area. And we have measured that in an analysis citywide. Then the public right of way is, in this case, when we're talking about street trees, another way of saying sidewalks. The tree pit is the area where the tree that's cut out for the tree, and the soil volume is the soil that is put in there for the tree to occupy. Now, we conducted a public street tree inventory at the start of this project, and we found that we had over 38,000 street trees and about 3,800 empty tree pits or potential planting sites. We've got a variety of species and ages, and all in all, 10.6% of the total tree canopy in Boston is made up of street trees. And it is a complicated picture. We measured change from 2014 to 2019 to look at how did that canopy grow or shrink? How did it appear or disappear? And while street trees did see a gain in canopy coverage, there were gains and losses in different areas of the city. And so it does require diving deep into that. And the urban forest plan will do that. Now, you can take a look at some of the statistics that came out of the street tree inventory, for instance, the top 10 species that we found in your street trees. And you can also scroll through an interactive map if you wanted to go point by point and take a look at what the trees near you are. Now, I want to start about the life of street trees. And the first thing is, how do we get them to grow old? We want to maintain life, but it is a tough environment living in the city. And protecting existing trees is one of the most important things we can do. It's more important than even planting individual trees, is making sure that when we plant, they also have a chance to get old. They face some challenges. You know, everything here, dog waste, salt, shadows, climate, pests and disease. There's a lot of challenges to living in the city. Some of these things we can work on together. Some of the things like climate change is we'll just have to keep thinking of solutions and trying to do our best to plan for those challenges. But in the meantime, how do we maintain trees? How do we keep them alive? Well, we are all maintainers. The Parks Department supplies most of the maintenance for street trees in Boston. We plant the street trees, we do the removals, and we also prune the trees, meaning cut the limbs so that the tree stays healthy and does not conflict with other utilities like electrical lines. And we do have a contract to water the trees in the first 2 years of their life, but years 3 to 5 can be pretty tough for a tree because we don't have that watering contract. And that's when it's also really helpful to have some support from the community. The urban forest plan is looking at all these things and is asking the question, where do we want to be? How might these things change? And anyone who can touch a tree can affect a tree. So that's why we like to say everyone is a maintainer. And anyone working in the public right of way, whether on construction projects with utilities, can affect a tree, and it's important to respect their complexity there. So, but when do we remove trees? We have a certified arborist go out into the field and take a look at trees and evaluate their health. And they determine if the tree is dead, dying, or dangerous. And that's when we remove trees. The only time a healthy public street tree will be removed is if someone takes it down illegally, or if they've been approved for removal through a tree hearing. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. Now, how do we cite trees? There's a lot of different considerations, so this is not a comprehensive list, but the big questions are, is there enough room to create a tree pit? Is there enough room for the tree to grow? You know, how tall or wide can it get? And would the tree conflict with other infrastructure like electrical lines or buildings? And we have more information online about some of the other questions we have to ask. Sometimes if you have a tree removed by you and we don't replant it, that can be because the tree was planted a long time ago and our guidelines have changed, or something about the situation has changed where the tree won't be able to have a long life there. Now, we try to plant a wide range of species because that safeguards against things like the emerald ash borer, who's now in Boston and goes after ash trees. We don't plant ash trees anymore, but they used to be planted in long stretches. And now those long stretches are at risk of infestation. We also choose according to other things like how tall does it get? How wide does a tree get? Is it tough enough for us? And is it culturally appropriate? You know, are we okay with the leaves that it drops, the nuts and fruits? What are we willing to live with? So those are some of the considerations. Now, planting, how does that happen? Well, you can request planting through 301. They happen during major projects such as this one, where we have an opportunity to provide more growing space because much of Boston has sidewalks that make it difficult to put in a tree or have the tree grow old. And then sometimes trees are planted through development projects. But I know this is something of interest, so I'll go into that a little bit more here. Development projects, sometimes they remove trees as well. Anyone may apply to remove a healthy public street tree through a tree hearing process. And if approved, they do pay a fee for, and they may recover that money by planting new trees. Anything that you see in the public right of way that isn't a plain dirt pit, maybe you see a tree grate or a fence, those probably have maintenance agreements by some other organization or entity besides the city. Parks Department manages, pardon the noise, the Parks Department manages the plain tree pits, and we do, so that's a cue that there may be some other agreement in place. Now, there are a lot of ways that we can all help street trees out, make their life a little stressful. That is, you can ask for one to be planted through 311, or if you see something up with a tree and you're like, that doesn't look right, you can submit a case through maintenance, for maintenance. Also, this isn't the whole list once more. We have more information online, but it would be great if you could keep dogs away from the pits. Their waste hurts the trees. And of course, keep trash out of pits. Do not lock your bikes to trees. Trees are more sensitive than they look like. Locks can rub away at the outer area of a tree and essentially expose its circulatory system. And as you can imagine, that's not good for the tree. It opens it up to disease and infection and other risks. If you could avoid stepping in pits, when you see tree roots at the real top of the pit and they're crawling along the surface, that's often a sign that their pit, the soil is compacted and the roots can't breathe and they're desperate. So avoid stepping in pits is a great way, an easy way to help our trees out. And then if you have the resources and ability, we welcome you to water young trees wherever possible. Though we know that's not always possible for everyone. So next slide. The last thing is, what does this all mean? That's kind of the life of street trees as it stands now. Those are some of the challenges. What's the urban forest plan? How's the urban forest plan going to affect these things? Well, we're going to put forward goals on how to care for street trees, how to act around street trees. We're going to come up with planting prioritization plan. Better way to say that is we're going to find ways to plan for planting of street trees in a way that's equitable. We're going to look at design. We're going to look at policy. We need more staffing. We need more funding. And we're going to be, the urban forest plan will be looking at all that and making recommendations so that we get to where we want to be and that we don't have our hearts broken because maybe, the city hasn't put enough in place to sustain the trees. So we see it and we're working on it. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Maggie. I had seen those slides before and I still learned a lot. So that was really fantastic and set up the rest of our work very well. So I'm, again, Jen. I'm gonna take it from here and share a bit about how we're planning for street trees on Cummins Highway. Here we have the opportunity, which is really exciting, to contribute to the canopy, as Maggie was talking about, and also to just improve the environment on Cummins itself. So there is a lot of potential for improvement in terms of having more street trees on Cummins Highway. The project area itself is about a mile in length, and it's only around 21 trees. And you can see on this map where those are located. You can also see that they're not evenly distributed among the corridor. There are very few trees on the further east side. Actually, I have I'll point to it. I can do that. So yeah, you can see that more trees towards the west, fewer towards the east. There's also 7 empty tree pits, which are represented here by the hollowed circles. There are a number of different types of trees. Linden and oak trees are the most common in the project area today. And you can see how those compare to the the 10 most common species that Maggie showed earlier. So you can see there are some overlapping, but you can also see that the trees that are existing on Cummins today are contributing to the diversity of trees in Cummins, because there are a lot of trees that aren't among the 10 most common. This slide shows what those trees look like. These are not images from Cummins itself, but are images of the trees in their when they are older. And I'll get back to age in just a moment. I will note that I believe Nathaniel's going to drop into the chat the slides from this presentation, and each of these is actually a link, so you can click and learn more about that tree. Trees on Cummins tend to be smaller, and so this graph here shows is their diameter at breast height, which is how we tend to measure the size of trees, and their age, and infer about how old they are. And so you can see the ones on Cummins tend to be between 1 and 9 inches, and you can see in comparison to this is all of the street trees in the city, how those stack up. Additionally, there are a few trees on Cummins today that aren't very healthy. As Maggie mentioned, citywide, we have an issue with ash trees, and maybe Kyle could speak to this a little bit more about whether the 3 ash trees that are on Cummins are affected by the ash borer, but they're not in great health. There are also 3 linden trees that are in poor to fair condition. On the plus side, the remainder of the trees are in excellent or good health. And we want to keep them that way. It's very important to us that the trees that are there today, that are healthy, that we do everything we can do to protect them. When we reconstruct Cummins, we'll be sure that the trunks of the trees get protected with something like on this image to the right here, some boards. We can also put fences around the tree pit to protect branches and roots. This is important, again, as Maggie mentioned, that stepping and compacting on the area right around the tree where the roots are can cause damage. And when we're constructing, we have a lot of heavy equipment. And in an instance where there is some unavoidable compaction, we can also use a device like the one this gentleman's holding here to use high pressure air to address that compaction. We also, as I mentioned earlier, have an opportunity to add new trees. This is really exciting. We have the ability to also make sure that these trees are more evenly spaced, particularly thinking about that eastern side of the corridor. We are going to be shooting for larger tree pits and larger stature trees. And so we would ideally be trying to space them out around 30 feet apart from each other so that they have the ability to get to their full canopy size. There are some places that we don't want to put trees, and we're learning more about the environment over the next few months as we're advancing in the design. But there's some things we're keeping an eye out. There's underground utilities. There's also in this area of the city some ledge, so it's a type of rock that's fairly high up in very close to the soil surface. And in those sort of situations, the trees might not have enough space to be healthy. So we don't want to set any new trees. We want them all to be set up for success. So we're going to be keeping an eye out for things that could get in the way. Additionally, we want to be careful not to be planting trees too close to light poles or fire hydrants, loading zones, driveways. And we keep an eye out for sight lines as well. So we want to plant trees far enough from a corner so that a car can, or someone driving in a car can see around that corner. And then we're also making sure that wherever we do plant a tree, there's enough space for it to thrive. And one of the things we're doing right now is making sure that throughout the corridor, we set aside a zone for trees. So this image shows a cross section of the roadway. And you can see that we're planning for tree zones on either side. Usually that they'll be between the sidewalk and the bike lane. And we're making sure that the pits are wide enough to really sustain a full, large, mature tree. There are some places, as we spoke about, where there are existing trees. And of course, as we mentioned, we really want to protect those. And so we're making sure that the design accommodates those trees. In some instances, that means that the sidewalks will be a tad narrower than other areas. So the sidewalk may stay the width it is today, rather than in other places, we will be able to expand the sidewalk. But we think that keeping these mature, healthy trees is worth that. And in some places, there may only be room for trees to be planted on one side of the roadway. This is a small portion of the roadway that this will be the case. And it's usually where there's a additional travel lane that is needed and takes up some space that we in other areas are able to allocate to the tree zone. All right, so the exciting part, selecting these new trees. We are looking for trees that will provide shade, because that's important for people walking, biking along the roadway. We are also choosing trees that lose their leaves in the winter. And these are deciduous trees. And the reason for that is that evergreen trees have more branches lower towards the ground, and that can get in the way of sight lines. So we're looking for deciduous trees where the first branches are higher up. And again, kind of reiterating this point about the street being a challenging environment for most trees. So we are specifically looking for trees that can thrive here. And the urban street, with some of the challenges Maggie spoke to, of salt, of pests, drought. And we're also looking for trees that are going to survive in our climate, both now and as the climate changes and warms over the coming years. The other important point in terms of selecting trees is making sure that we have a diversity of trees that we're planting, and that's going to help us prevent instances like where the emerald ash borer is devastating large swaths of our canopy. So if we have a mix of trees, it's less likely that something like that will, one pest will damage a large portion of the trees. And we're gonna be very careful to make sure we're picking the right tree for the right location. So along the length of Cummins, there's differences. On one side of the roadway, there's more light, and one side there's less light. So we're gonna make sure that we're selecting trees that do really well for where they are sited. And once they're planted, we wanna make sure that they stay healthy. Again, we're setting them up for success by making sure they have enough space and choosing the locations properly, making sure we're choosing robust species. And then once they're planted, we're gonna make sure that we're maintaining them and watering them consistently for the first 2 years, which is a critical period in their growth. Yeah. Now, I want to touch a little bit on this issue of compaction. So if you're familiar with the corridor, you may notice that in some places, and this picture to the right here is a picture of a street tree on Cummins, and maybe a little hard to see, but there's some heaving of the sidewalk where the roots are very close to the surface. This is particularly prevalent further towards the east of the roadway. And the reason this happens is that when tree roots don't have enough space, if they're not getting enough nutrients and water, they're going to try to expand, try to grow, but when they hit obstructions, challenges, especially when the soil has been compacted, they're going to change direction. They may stop growing, and sometimes they're going to adapt by being really close to the surface of the soil. And when they're located there, they can take advantage of cracks in the sidewalk and the pavement that occur through the freeze-thaw cycles. And that's what causes the heaving that you may observe and makes it difficult for people to be walking on the sidewalks. So thankfully, we have tools for this and ways to make sure it doesn't happen. One of those, besides for making sure we're giving enough space for the trees in their pits, we can also use something called structural soil under sidewalks. And so structural soil is soil that is resistant to being compacted. And that makes sure that tree roots have plenty of room to expand even outside of their pit and under the sidewalk. And that it also keeps soils oxygenated and allows for water drainage. So that I hope you're as excited as I am about the trees that we're going to get to plant here. We are still in the design process, and so we don't know exactly how many new trees there will be and exactly where they're going to be located. We will, however, host another meeting later in this process to share some of those details. All right, so that is the content we have about street trees. At this point, I'm going to open it up for questions. We can be curious to hear any that haven't been monitoring the chat. I'd be curious to hear what people have to say. And I believe Jeff is going to be kind of moderating the Q&A here. So I'll pass it over to Jeff.
Yes, hello everyone. Once again, I know there was a couple of questions that came through the chat while we were presenting. I believe those questions might have been addressed, but just to kind of
Jeff,
shout them out.
Yeah, we start. Yeah, thanks. Nathaniel, go for it.
So I just wanted to elevate a question that came up from Chad Fletcher. The question was, have you conducted any research on trees that are most beneficial to urban environments and those most likely to thrive in an urban environment?
Yeah, that is an excellent question. I'll start with that one, if you don't mind. We are doing research about what trees seem to be doing well, what are the climate trends showing us, and which species maybe should we begin to emphasize more planting of or add to our palette. So we are researching which ones will most likely survive. But dang, warm days like today, where they trick the trees and having a few of these in a row, they trick them into budding. I don't really know how we get around that. That's a hard one, but you can try to choose things that will fight through that. As for beneficial for the urban setting, that's an interesting one. I think, when it comes to air quality, there is some science there. Stormwater management, how much canopy does a tree have? We are looking at those sorts of things about what services can they provide.
We got another question from Susie, but it looks like Susie has her hand raised also. Would you like to unmute and say your question out loud, or would you like us to read it for you?
Yeah, hi. I'm a resident, and so I walk Cummins Highway, and I've been watching with great interest all of the changes you've been experimenting with. And I also am quite aware of the condition of the trees around the roadway. It's very sad. And I know planting trees is a beautiful thing, but I'm wondering how a tree can survive on a road like Cummins Highway. The amount of salt that's dumped on that road is unbelievable. The plows will pretty much destroy anything in their path that, and then I've seen maintenance people in other neighborhoods, for instance, on the Arbor Way, mowing, and then they just bump into trees and scar up the bottoms of them. And so as much as I love trees, I wonder, you know, are we perhaps being a little optimistic on our end to think that they're actually going to make it once they're in? And having them on the road is fabulous. I think that would be great. I'm also wondering what control, if any, your department has over the trees that are dying and dead and not being replaced in, for instance, Mount Calvary Cemetery, which is a Catholic cemetery, Mount Hope Cemetery, which I also walk in every day. I would say about 50% of the trees in both of those very large areas are dead, dying, or gone, because I can see the pits where they used to be, especially in Mount Hope, which is a city cemetery. It would be fabulous to see those trees being replaced, because I think those trees would really be able to survive, whereas the ones on Commons, you know, I think if everybody could get on the same page about them being important, that'd be great. Thank you.
Maggie, you want to take this one?
Sure, I'll start. That is an excellent question or point that you bring up, Susie. It does require a little bit of good faith given our city's history with street trees. And I would say that that's why one of the things that gives me a little more hope with the Cummins Highway project is that the design guidelines will be different. And it also informed by the urban forest plan, not to mention the team's knowledge and advancing priorities on protecting trees. So, you know, in some ways we can better protect trees against plows and other sorts of stressors, like, or MBTA buses, sometimes they take out a tree. Part of that is we have old roadways or old sidewalks and they haven't been updated. And so if we make those updates, there's more hope for the trees. And when it comes to, you know, making sure all city departments are on the same page, I understand that. It is hard. We're massive. And that's part of the reason why we included the city staff on the community advisory board as one of the bodies, the intergovernmental working group. And that's partly to bring everyone together and in the same room to talk about, honestly, what the issues are, and for staff to hear firsthand what it's like to live with what their people are seeing, what the lived experiences. And it will come down to really strong cultural adoption within the city, not only among departments, but then when people are actually in the field, making sure that we have the right oversight and controls and policy to make sure that we're really discouraging any sort of, you know, dangerous behavior and encouraging, you know, care for those. And then when it comes to planting and replacement of trees, and especially in our park system, you're right, like much less stressful than a sidewalk. And right now, for instance, though, the Parks Department doesn't have a planting budget for trees and parks, which is interesting. We only recently got a small pruning budget for trees and parks. So the urban forest plan is doing like a financial analysis, looking at all these things and saying, if you really want to do better, this is kind of the money and staffing and policy you're going to need to do that. Because you're right, you know, we are essentially in a situation where we only plant new trees in rare occasions or when we have a renovation or redesign of a place.
Joseph?
Yeah, I first would like to just reiterate what Susie said because I agree with all of that. I live on Pleasant View, and so I'm particularly interested. I mean, I'm interested in all of the trees, but we have this section of Cummins that's on the top of the hill that's just beyond what I didn't realize that this project ended at Harvard Wood intersection. I put in a tree request a little while back, and they responded that this construction project would basically deal with that. And so now I'm learning that it has nothing to do with that section of the road, which proportionally has way more empty pits and way fewer trees, some of which are dead and dying. So I'm wondering why that section of road was not considered. That they did the experimentation with the bike lane on this section as well and made a huge mess of the road because people would just run over the partitions and the plow them all over. So I'm wondering why that section of road is not part of this plan.
I can jump into that one. Thank you, Joseph. We appreciate your question, your comment. No, I agree with you 100%. We did look at that section of Cummins Highway, from Wood Ave to American Legion Highway, and we are making efforts to include that in an additional phase for the reconstruction of Cummins Highway. Unfortunately, we couldn't include it in this section in this project because of funding. We looked at the sidewalk work. It's they're definitely in need of some attention. We want to also install some new lighting along that section of Cummins Highway as well. But yeah, unfortunately, due to budgeting, we couldn't include it in this project. I mean, I think a high order of magnitude estimate came out to around $3 million. I mean, if you saw early in this presentation, we were looking at Cummins Highway, this section being 12 million, we're up to 24. So we are looking at it. We are looking to address it. It just it won't be included in this project. It will be included in the next one. So we are looking at that section of Cummins Highway and hoping to close that loop that we have for this roadway. I think Maggie might be able to speak to maybe the tree requests for the pits that are existing on that section. I definitely, I mean, I think in the presentation she mentioned that, I mean, reach out to 311. I know they have an extensive backlog of requests for trees. She may be able to kind of speak more to that.
No, yeah, I think you did the right thing by submitting the request for tree planting. And it sounds like, you know, the system has just got a little confused, or, you know, maybe there's some sorting out to do about, you know, like, can we plant a tree and can we revisit that idea? So if maybe you could email me with the information of the area and I can pass it on to the tree warden and see if there's any clarity or if that still stands as let's hold off. But I'd be happy to get into that because sometimes, yeah, there's mix-ups, but I appreciate you going through that and trying.
Looks like Chad Fletcher submitted a question in the chat. Says, I wanted to ask about any research done that informs city about the condition of existing trees on Cummins Highway. Wondering in particular when they were originally planted. And I wonder if that's a question, I don't know if maybe Maggie or maybe Kyle, who's the landscape architect on the project team, might have information about the trees on Cummins itself.
I'll give you the first stab.
Oh, go ahead.
No, you can start.
Well, determining the age of trees is difficult. And the best we can do is use the diameter as a basis for that judgment. And the statistics that Jen showed in terms of the diameter, most of the trees were less than like 9 inches, and there were a couple outliers that were bigger. So you could see that we've got 5 trees that are 2 inches, no, 3 inches, and then 4 that are two. But most of them are under 9 inches, and then it's one at 17 and one 24. My guess is, the ones that are 17 and 24 are probably could be from the 1970s or 80s. And all the ones smaller than 9 inches are less than 10 years old, although in an urban environment, a tree pit, some trees can stop growing and stay at a certain size for a long time. So unfortunately, the only way to really know is to either cut down the tree or you can take a boring, but neither one of those is good for the tree. So generally, what this is telling us, we have a lot of young trees that were probably planted in the past 20 years. And most of those in the last 5 to 10 years.
Thanks, Kyle.
All right, I'm not seeing any additional questions, but if you do have one, please feel free to put it in the chat, or you can raise your hand.
It was such a great presentation. We answered everyone's questions
Yeah.
ahead of time.
Go us. All right. I guess I'll maybe move on to the, Kenya has a question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I don't have a question. I just want to just make a comment. Just as a resident, I don't live that far from Cummins Highway, but I just wanted to share that I am excited that we're having this conversation about street trees along Cummins Highway. When I go to other major cities like DC, Maryland, and even parts of Atlanta, I love to see, like, in the metro area, there are these street trees that really just enhance the neighborhood. So I'm excited to see that we're having this conversation, and excited to see what's to come in several years on, some of the improvements and the changes for Cummins Highway that is very, very, very needed. I was on Cummins Highway today, just kind of, taking my time, going down the street, just keeping the scene, if you will. And, a lot of work is necessary on Cummins Highway. And so trees is definitely one of them to add to the list. So I just want to say thanks for having this conversation.
Thanks, Kenya. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Awesome. Well, I will advance quickly back to where we were and share a bit about what's coming next for the Cummins Highway project. So if you've been joining us during these conversations, you know that we're working towards creating a Cummins Highway that's safer and more accessible. We're hoping to transform it into a tree-lined neighborhood street, apropos to the topic today. And we want it to be safer for families to walk, to wait for the bus, to ride bikes, or travel by vehicle. We also want to connect residents to the city's network of open spaces and make it easier for elders to cross the street. So we've been at this since spring of 2019. And at the moment, we are well into the design now. And as we've been moving this design forward, we've been having very frequent touch points where we have been hosting events like this to talk about different aspects of the design and how they are informing what we're working on. So I'll walk through a very brief summary, high-level summary of where we've been and what we've talked about, and then share what's coming up next in these conversations. So we kicked off the conversations back in, well, as I mentioned, we'd had some previous community meetings, but this specific kind of venue of virtual conversations began in June 2021. We hosted a special edition of a Tea Talk with Charles T. Brown, a discussion about the ways mobility of Black Americans is limited in the US through police policies and polity. Charles, if you were there, you know it was a fantastic conversation. Charles is Twitter. I think Nathaniel just put into the chat. So go ahead and follow him or visit his website. In July, then, we followed up with 2 meetings with the city's environment department. We talked about the city's heat resilience study and the redesign of Cummins. And we also talked about air quality and how transportation policies and design influence air quality. And that input informed an exciting development where we have air quality sensors now installed on Cummins Highway. This is a partnership between the city's environment department, public works department, and the mayor's office of new urban mechanics. And there's now 8 air quality sensors along or near Cummins Highway. You may have seen them. Their signs, I'm told, just went up. And these sensors are measuring particulate matter as well as nitrogen dioxide. We're hoping to learn more about the effect that this project has on local air quality and how we can use that data that we're collecting and how to make that type of data accessible to everyone. And so on that last point, there will be an online dashboard that we'll be able to share later this year. So look forward to that. And so after air quality, we moved on to talk about the intersection of land use and transportation. We had invited folks from Plan Mattapan in the Boston Planning and Development Agency to talk about their work. And then in September, we shifted the focus to street lighting and opportunities to improve that in the Reconstruction. And I know Nathaniel is busy dropping in links where you can learn a bit more. I know I'm going very high level here, but each of these conversations was as informative as this one. So please do kind of check those out. In October, we talked to the Boston Public Health Commission about the connection between street design, health, and well-being. And then just last month, we hosted a meeting to talk about bus stops on Cummins Highway. And that leads us to next month will be on March 19th. Oh, sorry, March 29th. We'll be talking about roundabouts and intersections in the Cummins Highway redesign. So you can already register at the link that is on this page and that Nathaniel is dropping in the chat. We hope to see you there. And as always, we're going to end with some additional resources about other exciting happenings in Mattapan and in the broader area. So we're in Dorchester. So we have first, a reminder about what Maggie already advertised, the Urban Forest Master Plan virtual open house. I think Nathaniel's dropped that in the chat, Monday, March 14th at 5:30. And all right, another exciting news. Last time we showed this, it was the Route 28. Now it's Route 23, 28, and 29 are all free for 2 years. And you can learn more about that at the link on this page and how to access that. Then there's a youth-focused Tea Talk this Saturday. It's focusing on Blue Hill Avenue as a place. It's strictly for Mattapan youth aged 10 to 19. There's a chance to win a gift card. So definitely please share this with younger folks in your life. There's a winter walk at the Boston Nature Center hosted by Spark Boston, which is the mayor's council for younger adults. There's going to be a documentary film at the Mattapan Branch Library with activist, educator, and philosopher Angela Davis, and a cooking class hosted by Bond of Color and the Mattapan Food and Fitness Coalition. Actually, sorry, not just a class, it's a series of classes. And the registration for that you can find at mattapanfoodandfit.org. I mentioned we were talking about Dorchester too, so there's going to be, there's plans in the works for a new community center, a BCYF center, and there's a meeting about that on February 28th. And then tonight, since it looks like we may be ending a little bit early, you could probably still jump on to a virtual meeting about community choice electricity. It's hosted by Mothers Out Front West Roxbury, Keep Hyde Park Beautiful, and the city's Environment Department. You can learn more about how to save money through the city's collective purchasing of electricity. And then we couldn't have a transportation event without promoting Blue Bikes. We do have discounted passes for Blue Bikes, which is our public bike share system. People who participate in public assistance programs or otherwise have a qualifying income can receive a discount. So check out that link there. And the City of Boston is dedicating federal funds to help Boston residents who have been economically impacted by the pandemic and are having difficulty paying rent. So you can, for more information about eligibility and resources and to apply, you can visit the link that Nathaniel has just put in the chat now. All right, and finally, we'd love it if you would stay in touch. And I say that for both the folks on the Cummins Highway project and the folks and Maggie and the team at the Environment Department. So do check out the Urban Forest Plan website and attend that open house. And on this page are ways to, the link to the Cummins Highway project website where you can sign up for emails. You can also sign up to chat with us, and you can reach out to Jeff, whose email is on this page and who introduced this meeting. Let's see, I think that takes us to the end. So I guess I'll, before signing off, just wanted to provide one more opportunity if anyone had any questions before we sign off. All right. Thank you, Nathaniel, for dropping in. Nathaniel just put in all of the meeting slides, both in English, Spanish, and Haitian Creole. So definitely welcome to revisit those. And thank you so much for joining us tonight. It was a real pleasure. We're so glad you were here, and we hope to see you in a month. All right.
Thank you, everyone. You have a good night.
Can stop recording, Hannah.